Judicial experts say Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito violated ethics rules by displaying a symbol of the Stop the Steal movement as former President Donald Trump tried to reverse the outcome of the 2020 election.
The New York Times had this bombshell report that moved late last night. It included details about what you see there on the right side of your screen. That's an upside-down American flag flown outside Alito's home near Washington while the Supreme Court was considering challenges to the election back in 2021. The display calls Alito's impartiality very much into question as the court now is deciding whether Trump has immunity from prosecution related to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Now, in a statement to the Times, Alito said his wife flew that inverted flag, and she did it in response, he says, to a neighbor's display of a profane anti-Trump sign. Joining us now to discuss the situation
is Gabe Roth, the executive director of Fix the Court. Good morning, Gabe. Always good to see you. Even if he was not the one who actually hung the flag, I mean, this is not a good look. What should we take from this?
And this is yet another in a long line of ethics troubles at our U.S. Supreme Court. Whether or not a neighbor had a profane sign in their yard, there is no reason to be displaying a symbol that is associated with a very fervently political movement on a justice's front yard. Justices are supposed to be above politics, above partisan politics. And what's interesting to me too is this idea of the upside down flag being a symbol of Stop the Steal. Like, that's not necessarily something a lot of people knew or thought of at the time. I mean, upside down flags have been a symbol throughout American history, but you gotta be pretty deep into the right-wing media ecosphere to sort of associate displeasure with flying that sign. So that sort of makes me a little bit worried about the Alito's media habits. But overall, this is clearly a court whose members just feel like they are above the law, can act with impunity, and a lot of folks are asking right now what can be done, and unfortunately, the answer is very little.
I don't want to understate how stunning a story this really is if you think about what it means. And this is a worthy news story and a worthy discussion. And we can talk about Clarence Thomas accepting gifts from rich mega donors, and all that is deeply problematic. And Sotomayor doing some things to help ensure the sale of her book. Okay, but this is different. This was about one of the darkest days and darkest periods in American political history. And it's an issue the court is still actively deciding upon that could have a hugely consequential effect on the November election, this idea of presidential immunity. There are real consequences to this, as you can't ignore this story in that context. But I also thought that the justice's response was interesting. He blamed the wife, and clearly you have to know what your wife thinks politically and that she had done this. This is in front of your home, a big flag outside your home, so clearly visually you're aware of it. And three, it's in response to a neighbor who apparently was anti-Trump, or at least anti-Stop the Steal. As a Supreme Court justice, you don't feel that you should rise above a neighbor's profane sign? That's the level you see yourself on as arguably one of the most powerful people in America? It's jarring on every level. What's your gut take on this?
Yeah, that's something I think that you're making a very, very important point, is that when you are in public service, you have to stay above the fray. You can't respond to every insult or expletive, and I'm sure you as news anchors, as public figures, get some, and I get some, and it's nowhere near a level that Justice Alito gets. I mean, we know that there are, very sadly, justices whose lives have been threatened in the last few years, both on the left, Sotomayor, and on the right, Kavanaugh. So there is definitely sometimes a very violent strain to some of the negative comments. That being said, if someone says, F Trump or something like that on their lawn, or even F Alito, you have to be bigger than that. It is your responsibility as a public servant to be bigger than that and not react to that, and not react to it in a way that is consistent with all these, far-right nut jobs that believe that, Donald Trump is still president. It is clearly a message. It's one way to display displeasure. It's a totally different thing to do it in a way that is consistent with an insurrectionist movement. And I think that's something that's worth underscoring here and saying that, this is something that is very different, like you said, from a yacht trip or a private plane ride.
And we had the same conversation with Ginny Thomas when we saw her post-election text released to Kraken, and okay, you have to have these conversations over dinner with your husband, Clarence Thomas. Kind of the same situation here with this is in front of your house. You must know that what this actually means, and it seems like the crutch here has been to put the spotlight on the wife, or to deflect from, okay, this was not me, this was someone who lives in my house, but I have no control over that. At what point will it be so egregious, whatever it is, whether it's text after the election, whether it's hanging this flag and what it symbolizes? I mean, we already know that people are losing faith with the court. At what point will more ethic, I guess, guardrails have to be put up when this cannot always be the excuse is, oh, well, my wife did it or someone else did it and I was just responding?
Yeah, and I think about, what would happen if this were, Justice Jackson's husband or someone in Justice Sotomayor's family or in Justice Kagan's front yard, right? I think, how would the right be reacting if the shoe was on the other foot? And to me, what we need are adults in Congress from both parties who can sit down and hammer out some enforcement mechanisms to the ethics code, right? The ethics code that the justices agreed to back in November says there should be no political activity. And I think flying your flag upside down, which is a political symbol at a time at which it was being used as a very specific political symbol, is political activity. So, despite the fact that this is clearly flouting the code of conduct, I think more than that, we need members of Congress to step in and say, okay, these are what the consequences would be. Is that impeachment? Is that censure? Is that a referral to the Justice Department? I actually just got a text coming through my computer where a member of Congress's legislative director is saying they're working on legislation as we speak. So we know that people are, wow, that was good timing, paying attention to this. But yeah, I think holding justices accountable is something that is a conundrum. We're stuck in this, the Constitution of 1789 that says it's basically impeachment or nothing. But I think that there are creative ways to change that, whether it be, again, like I said, through censure, through reprimands, through public reporting with ethics councils, with internal ethics investigations that lead to, apologies, forced recusals, right? There's no reason that I couldn't file a complaint theoretically against Justice Alito and have the other 8 justices decide that complaint about whether Justice Alito is impartial enough to sit on the immunity cases. The fact that Justice Alito is the judge and jury in his impartiality relative to any number of SCOTUS cases is ridiculous. You cannot judge your own bias, like any Psych 101 student can tell you that. So I think there are ways to hold justices accountable, to push for changes in behavior, and to act strong now, because the next generation of justices are going to be acolytes of the Alitos and the Thomases. So this is not, I'm almost, on some levels less worried about, a 72-year-old Justice Alito and a 76-year-old Justice Thomas than I am about the next generation who just sees what's happening now as, justices getting off scot-free, whereas I think there instead should be a bipartisan strong response to be sure things like this don't happen again with impunity.
And to be clear, they so far have not shown a strong appetite at all for real ethics reform. What they did last year doesn't have a whole lot of teeth. And number 2, they're there for life. And they know that, and we know that too. And again, that symbol, that flag, could be easily construed as a belief that you don't think Joe Biden is the legitimate president of the United States. And if we're headed for another tight, contested election this November that, let's say, ends up before the court, you do now have to wonder how that is going to go if we're about to have another round of election denialism from one side or the other. It throws so much into question beyond the moment, because we're heading into just 6 months away from this rematch. We're out of time. I could talk about this for all 6 hours of our morning show because this story blew my mind.
I know you can. I know you love getting into these issues.
You know I do. Gabe, and I love talking to you because you bring such insight. Appreciate your time.